Over the past 2 weeks, we've covered the top 3 endgame PVE builds for Warlocks and Hunters, and today we'll be finishing off this 3-part series with the top 2 builds for our Titans. I originally wanted to showcase 3 builds for you guys, but as many of you know from my community post last month, I recently lost my mother and simply didn't have time to create a 3rd build that I'd be comfortable recommending to you all. So without making this intro too much of a downer, I'd love to see your favorite Titan builds down in the comments below for everyone to enjoy. Now, with all of that said, I'm extremely excited about the 2 builds that we do have for you today, as they embody what Titans do best, and that's punch everything in your path and leave a wake of destruction behind you. I'm Above, and if you enjoyed today's video, a like and subscription would be greatly appreciated. Now, let's get into it. First up, we'll be covering what is quite possibly the most broken build in Destiny history. We've covered some extremely powerful builds over the past few weeks, ranging from ways to produce infinite heavy ammo to ways that we can permanently stunlock bosses. But when used correctly, Banner of War Berserker Titan is by far the most dominant build in the game. Responsible for every Grandmaster Nightfalls speedrun world record, this build puts out insane single target damage, provides unmatched damage resistant survivability, and comes with fast-paced movement and top-tier ad control all at the same time. This is a high-risk, high-reward playstyle that when used correctly becomes the highest damage unkillable build in Destiny. So let's talk about how we can get the most out of this subclass, starting with our aspects. First up, we have the obvious one in Banner of War, which states that defeating a target with a melee or finisher raises a banner that provides healing and increased melee damage to you and nearby allies. This is a 40% buff to your melee damage, with the healing frequency tied directly to your Banner of War stacks. This caps out at a maximum of 4, where the healing pulse becomes strong enough to help you sustain absurd amounts of incoming damage. And this is amplified even further by our next aspect, Into the Fray, which states that destroying a tangle or casting your super grants woven mail to you and nearby allies. This is a 45% damage resist that stacks with tier 10 resilience, mitigating insane levels of incoming damage. With that said, you're most vulnerable when one of your 2 aspects isn't procced, so getting them going as quickly as possible and then maintaining those stacks is key to success here. The gameplay loop is fed to us by your charged melee ability, which is easy at first, but the skill ceiling of this build is exponential once you understand how to use it for more than just healing. While your base melee ability is a strong source of damage, the grapple melee is devastating when used correctly. It can be stacked with 1-2 punch shotguns, making it one of the highest single target damage abilities in the game. The key here is managing your grapple cooldowns, which can be done by grappling onto existing tangles that will fully refund your grenade charge. This can be done by utilizing your teammates' tangles in open combat, or using weapons like the Navigator to create long-lasting grapple points during boss fights, allowing us to use the high damage grapple melee over and over and over again. Speaking of damage, Titans have some incredibly powerful melee-based exotics that can buff our damage even further, including the Syntheseps and Wormgod's Caress. Synthos used to be the go-to exotic due to its 200% melee damage increase when surrounded by enemy combatants, which made this exotic extremely easy to use. But after a 35% damage nerf and a reduction to its lunge range, it opened the door for Wormgods after it received a game-changing buff this season. This exotic now states that defeating a target with a melee or finisher grants escalating melee and weapon damage that decays over time. At ×5 Burning Fists, this is a 275% increase to your melee damage and a 25% increase to your weapon damage. With that said, higher stacks decay much faster, with ×4 and ×5 lasting just 4 seconds each. At ×4 we get a 220% damage bonus, and at ×3 we match Syntheseps at the now 165% damage bonus that lasts 10 full seconds. So as you can see, Wormgods has a much higher skill gap, but it also has much higher damage potential. We'll just need to be strategic about how and when we kill enemies to maintain these stacks at all times. Plus, when we reach maximum stacks heading into a damage phase, you're guaranteed at least 8 seconds of a damage bonus that far exceeds anything Syntheseps can provide, with an additional 10 seconds that will be on par with Synthos, making this the go-to exotic for solo play. But in team settings where you're running 3 Banner of War Titans, which believe it or not is extremely extremely common in today's meta, it becomes very difficult for everyone to maintain these stacks, which makes Synthos a better complementary option due to their ease of use. Diving into our fragments, first up we have Thread of Warding, where picking up an Orb of Power grants Woven Mail. This is the easiest way to proc the 45% damage resist and synergizes perfectly with the armor mods we'll cover later in the video. Next we have Thread of Fury, where damaging targets with a tangle grants melee energy, so each time we create a tangle, we can leverage them to maintain our cooldowns, which feeds perfectly into Thread of Generation, where dealing damage generates grenade energy. These are incredibly powerful fragments that synergize with dealing damage to maintain ability cooldowns, allowing us to keep Banner of War, Burning Fists, and Woven Mail procced at all times. And last but not least, we have Thread of Ascent, which states that activating your grenade ability reloads your weapons and provides airborne effectiveness and handling for a short duration. Since we'll be using the grapple melee to feed our main source of damage, this ensures our weapons are loaded every time we need them. As for key armor mods, we went with double hands-on on the helmet for bonus super energy when securing melee final blows, grenade kickstart and impact induction on the gauntlets to reduce our grapple cooldowns, and heavy-handed to generate orbs when securing charged melee kills, which is essential for maintaining Woven Mail. I recommend melee resist and concussive dampener for close range combat, recuperation and absolution on the boots for a burst of healing and ability cooldowns when you pick up Orbs of Power, and bomber on the class item to reduce your grapple cooldowns even further. Important artifact mods include Unraveling Orbs, where picking up an Orb of Power grants strand weapons unraveling rounds. This can be used as an intrinsic source of anti-barrier with strand weapons like the Navigator or Swordbreaker that are commonly used with these builds. And second, we have Horde Shuttle, where damaging unraveled targets with a strand weapon will occasionally spawn a Threadling. This helps generate tangles, giving us additional sources of Woven Mail and shorter ability cooldowns. This all synergizes together to create one of the most powerful builds Destiny has ever seen, and with a bit of practice, you'll be slaying Grandmasters faster than ever before. I want to give a huge shout out to my friend Khan, who helped me put this build together, and if you'd like to see it used to its full potential, you can watch his world record speedruns using the links down in the description below. Next up, we have Solar Titan, but instead of using our beloved Bonk Hammer, we're gonna mix things up by introducing the Knee. Though this build isn't as potent as Banner of War and GMs, cause let's be honest, nothing is, the recently buffed Peregrine Greaves has opened up an entirely new playstyle, with a build that can one-shot champions, speed farm lost sectors, and provide insane levels of healing all in one. This exotic provides a 225% damage buff to any shoulder strike ability while airborne, which is enough to make Hammer Strike viable on its own. However, Peregrine's gained an additional 1000% damage buff against mini-bosses this season, including the likes of Tormentors and Champions. This exotic also refunds your melee energy whenever you hit a mini-boss, meaning you can spam this ability on champions as much as you'd like without ever losing your shoulder charge. This build does fall off slightly in Grandmaster level content, but absolutely obliterates raids, dungeons, and legend lost sectors for all you farmers out there. Let's kick things off with our aspects. First up, we have Soul Invictus, which states that Solar ability Final Blows, Hammer of Soul impacts, and defeating scorched targets creates sunspots. Your abilities regenerate faster, and your super drains more slowly when standing inside. Sunspots apply Scorch and deal damage to enemies caught inside of your sunspots, making them a nice tool for ad clear. Entering a sunspot also applies Restoration, a key part to the survivability of this build, as this happens after every single shoulder charge. The ability regen and survivability you get when standing in a sunspot is actually insane, allowing you to cycle abilities in literal seconds. Our next aspect is Roaring Flames, which states that final blows with solar abilities or ignitions will increase the damage of your next solar abilities up to a 73% damage bonus at ×3, and yes, this stacks with the 1000% damage buff from the Peregrine Greaves, making this a devastating attack on just about any enemy in the game. I went with fusion grenades as a consistent way to get Roaring Flames started, and from there, the damage bonus was enough to to one-hit champions with Hammer Strike even when 10 levels under power. And what's awesome about this is the fact that the ignitions caused by your shoulder charge will kill surrounding adds and instantly escalate us to Roaring Flames times 3. You then have 20 seconds to make your way to the next group of enemies and extend this buff even further. As for our fragments, first up we have Ember of Torches, which allows Hammer Strike to make you and allies radiant, granting our weapons a 25% damage bonus and intrinsic anti-barrier. Next, we have Ember of Searing, which provides melee energy and creates a fire sprite every time we defeat a scorched target. This synergizes perfectly with Kindling Trigger from this season's artifact, as it scorches enemies with solar weapons and allows us to regen our Hammer Strike incredibly fast should we ever lose it. This pairs perfectly with our next fragment, Ember of Blistering, which grants grenade energy each time we defeat a target with an ignition. And since Peregrine's causes an ignition after every successful Hammer Strike, you'll get a massive chunk of grenade energy back each time. And this synergizes perfectly with Rays of Precision, where precision final blows with a solar weapon while radiant will cause enemies to ignite. This not only makes our ad clear incredible, it allows us to use weapons like Sunshot and Zhaoli's Bane as top tier picks with this build, and even something like a solar machine gun to help complement our ad clear. And we can then take this even further by using Ember of Empyrean, which allows our solar weapon kills and ability final blows to extend restoration and radiant. These fragments bring our gameplay loop together, providing radiant when we shoulder charge, restoration from the sunspots that appear after we defeat enemies with our Hammer Strike, grenade regen from the Peregrine ignitions, with solar weapon final blows extending these buffs even further. Key armor mods include Hands-On and Font of Wisdom on the helmet to gain super energy each time we secure a melee final blow, and increase our intellect stat by 30 whenever an armor charge is active, both of which will happen constantly thanks to Hammer Strike. It's important to have our super up as often as possible because Hammer of Soul has incredible amounts of damage resist while active, which can serve as a get out of jail free card in sticky situations. On the gauntlets, we went with Impact Induction, which reduces your grenade cooldown when causing damage with your charged melee ability, and Heavy-Handed, which generates orbs of power on charged melee final blows. On the chest, you have your standard resist mods, and on the boots, I went with Recuperation for a burst of healing each time we defeat an enemy with Hammer Strike. And keep in mind that when you do this, you'll also produce a Sunspot to proc restoration, with Recuperation acting as a burst heal to top up your health each time we secure a melee final blow. And on the class item, I went with Outreach and Bomber to reduce our melee and grenade cooldowns even further, with Time Dilation increasing the duration of our armor charges for maximum effect with Font of Wisdom. The synergy between aspects, fragments, and armor mods leads to insane levels of healing and ability regen, all while having that one-shot ability in your back pocket. This build is easily the most fun I've had this season, and I definitely recommend giving it a try if you haven't already. Well guys, that's gonna do it for the video. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, a like and subscription would be greatly appreciated. I'll be out of town attending my mother's memorial, so I appreciate the understanding that there may be a pause in content over the next several days. Anyways guys, that's it from me. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.